Violence in Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, between Israeli settlers and Palestinians has made global headlines, as well as created drastically conflicting accounts of what happened. Last week, we heard a Palestinian perspective, and now we're joined by Naomi Kahn, director of Regavim's international division, to hear the other side. Okay, Naomi, so how do you see these international headlines? You're obviously in the land. What do you make of it?
Well, we didn't want to trust ourselves. So we at Regavim actually spent over a year researching exactly what's behind these headlines. What are the real facts? And we were quite shocked to find what we found. We had to do a kind of James Bond move to get the United Nations to release the data behind their big, the UN's, they call it a dashboard of casualties and fatalities, violent incidents in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. And they call it actually occupied Palestinian territories. And when we began to dive in, we began to understand what we had suspected, what we had known from other areas was actually true. This is a very, very carefully constructed, very, very systematic apparatus that is creating a narrative based on falsehoods, based on misrepresentations, based on miscategorizations of incidents, and blowing the small amounts of violence that there actually are way out of proportion. On the other hand, they are minimalizing the massive amounts of violence to which Jewish citizens of the state of Israel in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, are subjected every day, all day, on a daily basis. So they're downplaying one side of the equation and super inflating the other side of the equation.
So speaking of those international headlines, two of which have kind of come to the forefront of basically everywhere. One is the idea of these three churches putting out this letter saying that Israeli settlers attacked the Christian city of Taibe, set fire to, certain cars and the church. And then there's the other one where basically a Palestinian American was killed. Let me read you a headline from the New York Times. Quote, Huckabee calls death of Palestinian American in West Bank terrorism. So these are the headlines that we're seeing here in the West. What is your perspective?
From what we have found, and I have seen video footage of the incident at Taiba, I have not seen footage I have seen footage that everyone's seen, actually, of both incidents. Let's start that again. The incident in Taiba is actually a great example of what I was discussing before. The incident has actually been turned around 180 degrees. Apparently, local Arab villagers set fire to grazing fields in which the Jewish shepherds of a nearby community grazed their flocks in order to push the Jewish shepherds out. The fire got out of control, set fire to parts of the cemetery at St. George's Church in Taibe, and which is in the courtyard, essentially, of the church. The Jewish shepherds were the ones who put out the fire while they were calling for backup, for police, for the fire brigade to come. And all of those phone calls and those distress calls are recorded and documented. Someone took pictures of them putting the fire out. So the misrepresentation here is extremely purposeful. It's not an accident. It's part of a much bigger program. What happened in the other incident on Shabbat, on Saturday, a week ago, was a premeditated confrontation that was staged by Palestinian Arab activists, in which this young Palestinian American took part. As a matter of fact, after the incident was over, the Hamas put out a martyrdom notice that one of their Hamas fighters had fallen in action. Now, this didn't involve a confrontation with individual Jewish people. The casualties in that incident happened because the IDF was there. That was because this confrontation was planned and publicized in Palestinian media, official Palestinian media, that they were going to go and uproot a Jewish settlement. And so they staged this whole confrontation. There was a whole rock throwing, and then there was incendiary devices, and then there were explosives thrown at this Jewish community. The IDF stepped in, things became even more violent. Shots were fired in the air. There were no beatings. There was no confrontation with individual Israeli civilians. So that was just completely misrepresented as well. And all these things were documented and released by official spokespeople. But those voices were drowned out by the noise created by very anti-Israel forces who are using these incidents to stoke an anti-Israel narrative.
Okay, so let me ask you two questions, and you kind of answered the first one. Why are these stories getting so unbelievably, in your opinion, misrepresented, basically categorically false? But then maybe also a helpful thing for maybe some of our friends who are watching. What exactly is an Israeli settler? Obviously, I've spent a lot of time in Judea and Samaria, and some of these settlements, like Ma'ale Adumim, is massive. It's not a settlement. It's not a town. It's a city. Some of them are smaller that I've been to, like Itamar, Shiloh. So it's really confusing for a lot of folks. What on earth is a settlement? What are settlers? So maybe a two-part question. Maybe just clarify who we're talking about, and then also why these people are being painted holistically around the world in such negative light.
Okay, so I am a settler, according to some people. I am speaking to you from a Jewish community in Judea, actually in the Binyamin region of Judea. And the land on which this room is sitting, this house is built, was actually owned by a Jewish family and registered to Jewish ownership going back to before 1910. It was registered already during the Ottoman Empire as Jewish property. Unfortunately, this area fell into Jordanian hands when Jordan and 4 other Arab armies attacked the state of Israel in 1948. This territory was held for 19 years illegally by the Jordanians, and therefore, when Israel repatriated this territory, liberated this territory in 1967, what should have happened, what happens everywhere else in the world in that sort of situation, is that the state of Israel should have reestablished its original sovereignty here, sovereignty that it never had the opportunity to exercise because it was attacked immediately upon independence. So anyone who lives in the areas that were liberated by the state of Israel from the illegal Jordanian occupation in 1967 is called, in some international circles, a settler. All settlers are Jewish people who are full citizens of the state of Israel who have chosen to live in the areas that were repatriated in the 1967 war. Now, I can tell you that the location I'm speaking to you from is exactly equidistant between Ramallah and Jerusalem. And that sounds like a massive thing, but I'm less than 5 miles away from either one. So the distances we're talking about here are extremely small. The land on which I am sitting has never been contested or claimed by any other owner. It's signed, sealed, and delivered Jewish land, but that doesn't stop some international voices from calling it an illegal occupation. Based on what law, I have no idea. They try to make them up as they go along, apparently. But I am a settler, and so are more than 500,000 other Jewish Israelis who have come back to the lands liberated in the 1967 war, lands that were always part of sovereign Israel from the moment Israel was recognized as a state, and going all the way back to biblical times. Again, I'm living in a region that was lived in by the tribe of Benjamin for thousands of years. And this entire area was the agricultural powerhouse that fed pilgrims coming to Jerusalem. This was the last plateau where agriculture was possible before you start ascending the hills to Jerusalem. All of these areas are steeped in Jewish history. They are steeped in biblical history. And every step that you take here, if my kids would go out in the backyard and just dig around in the dirt, they would come up with ancient seals and pieces of pottery from 2,000 years ago. We have been here forever, and we intend to stay here forever.
You know, I do find it interesting, and this might come across very political, that the only place in the world that people, have a serious and very passionate opinion about certain people living in a certain place, is when Jews live in Judea. I do find that interesting.
Yeah,
But as for now, my friend, again, I think your perspective is absolutely crucial to this discussion. I do not see your perspective anywhere else, and I think it's important that we do whatever we can to at least amplify your voice so that people can hear that yes, there are other perspectives. But as for now, Naomi Kahn, toda rabah, and God bless, my friend.
you too.